In this episode, a young couple celebrating their 4th wedding anniversary is brutally mauled by a malnourished black bear. As the bear attacks his wife, he heroically jumps on its back in a life-or-death fight to save his wife. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying bear attack on Mark Jordan and Jacqueline Perry. Welcome to Final Affliction. Mark Jordan and Jacqueline Perry were celebrating their 4th wedding anniversary. Being outdoor enthusiasts, they both decided to mark the occasion with 2 weeks camping in Canada's Lake Missinaibi Provincial Park. The 100,000-hectare park offers an incredible outdoor experience. Popular activities include canoeing, backpacking, boating, fishing, and camping. There are over 100 different campsites, many of which are only accessible by boat. When you set up your tent in Lake Missinaibi Park, you really are on your own. Although this can be a magical experience, it can also prove deadly. Visitors are attracted to the area for its outstanding beauty, the large, peaceful lakes with their glassy surfaces reflecting the woodland surrounds, the haunting call of the loon, and the nighttime howling of wolves, the majestic beauty of a moose standing knee-deep at the lake's edge, or the glimpse of a black bear through the thick brush. It was September 2005, 80 kilometers north of Chapleau, Ontario. Mark and Jacqueline pulled up into a car park in Lake Missinaibi Provincial Park. Together, they lifted their double kayak off the roof of their car and lowered it into the river. They loaded it up and climbed in. Both of them were enjoying the tranquility of the wilderness. They barely saw a soul for the first few days of their trip. They moored up at remote campsites. Often, the only indication it was a campsite was the presence of a thunderbox. This was a 3-sided cubicle placed over a hole in the ground, which is used for a toilet. After pulling up at one campsite, the couple spent the remaining hours of sunlight organizing the tent, campfire, and dinner. They took a swim in the lake before settling down beside the blazing fire. The trip had been magical so far, a break that both of them had needed. The following morning, they awoke at the sun's first light. Stretching and yawning, Mark unzipped the tent and saw to the fire. He managed to reignite it from a few remaining embers. He collected some water from the lake to boil on the open flames, whilst Jacqueline foraged for wood to keep the fire going. They had a long paddle ahead of them until the next campsite, so decided to have a proper breakfast and fill their flasks with plenty of tea. As Jacqueline collected the wood in her arms, she heard a distinctive snap of a twig. She froze and looked around, but saw nothing. She called out to Mark, whose reply confirmed he was still by the fire. Not seeing anything, Jacqueline continued to collect wood amongst the trees. She took the armful back to the fire and then headed back for some more. Returning to the same spot, Jacqueline bent down to pick up more wood when suddenly she was knocked to the ground. The force was so strong and unexpected that she didn't have time to react. She let out a yell as she crashed onto the floor. Her head hit the ground and the air was knocked from her lungs. Jacqueline gasped as a black bear pinned her down and savagely mauled her face. She could feel the deep tearing from the bear's claws on her body, the pressure from the bear's jaws as it bit down on her face. She screamed. In an instant, Mark was there. He whipped his Swiss Army knife from his pocket and jumped onto the bear just as it tried to drag Jacqueline off into the woods. Mark held on. He wrapped his arms around the bear's neck and with the small blade of the pocket knife stabbed the bear again and again, but the bear thrashed around, managing to throw Mark off its back, sending him crashing to the ground. The attack was so sudden and so powerful, it had taken the couple completely by surprise. The size and weight of the bear was incredible. It hardly flinched when Mark drove his knife into its flesh. The bear was so focused on Jacqueline that it seemed nothing would stop it. It continued its frenzied attack on Jacqueline, grabbing her in its jaws once more. Mark leapt up and threw himself at the bear again. He punched it on the muzzle and pushed the knife into the bear's neck over and over. The bear let go of Jacqueline and ran off into the woods. Mark watched as he saw the hind end of the bear lumbering over fallen tree branches and vanishing. Mark held Jacqueline in his arms. She was bleeding heavily. He tried to stem the bleeding, but she had so many wounds it felt hopeless. He picked her up and carried her to their kayak. Lying her down in the bottom of the plastic boat, he began paddling frantically across the water. All the while, he was crying out for help. Jacqueline's cries died down. Her breathing became labored, and she closed her eyes. Mark told her not to give up. He yelled at her to stay awake. He desperately scanned the shoreline looking for anyone who could help. With each passing minute, he grew more and more desperate. Jacqueline was fading fast, but Mark continued to paddle the boat towards the next campsite in the hope of finding someone there. He, himself, had sustained significant injuries. The bear had severed several nerves in his arms and hands. He had puncture wounds from where it had bitten him as he fought with it, trying to save his wife. Blood oozed from deep gashes in his arms, trickling down his body as he pulled on each paddle stroke. After an agonizing hour had passed, Mark finally spotted two men in a paddle boat in the distance, a father and son from Pennsylvania. They heard Mark's desperate cries and paddled their boat over to the kayak. Holding the kayak steady against their boat, they carefully lifted Jacqueline onto theirs. Mark climbed aboard, and they all paddled together in search for help. They spotted a pontoon in the distance with two people inside. Mark flagged them down. Remarkably, one was a doctor from North Carolina, and the other was an off-duty police officer. The doctor tried desperately to save Jacqueline. While the boat sped through the water, he stemmed the bleeding and began performing CPR, but it was too late. Help had arrived too late for Jacqueline. She succumbed to her injuries 2 hours after the attack, before they could get her to the park office 6 miles away. Mark was evacuated out of the wilderness and to Sudbury Regional Hospital. The deep lacerations he had sustained required surgery. He received 300 stitches and was pumped full of antibiotics to stave off infection. He slowly made a recovery in hospital. His injuries were fixed, but his heart was broken. His heroic efforts were rewarded with a Medal of Bravery, but Mark didn't feel brave. He felt like he could have done more. He wished he had known more about black bears and about their behavior. Bear experts who were asked to comment on the tragic events said that the bear wasn't just being aggressive, it was being predatory. It had sniffed out Jacqueline and Mark from a distance and homed in on their location. Seeing Jacqueline in the woodland on her own, the bear had stalked her. It had remained hidden and silent until the opportune moment when it struck. Mark had assumed when he was attacking the bear that punching it and stabbing it with a pocket knife would have been enough to cause it to run away. Instead, it continued to attack Jacqueline, causing fatal damage. Mark said that if he was able to hold on to the bear, grabbing it in a headlock and stabbing it with his knife, he should have slit its throat, killing it before it could inflict any more damage. Following the attack, officials immediately closed off the interior section of the park where the attack had taken place. They searched for campers in the area to warn, but because visitors were under no obligation to register their presence, it was not known how many visitors there were in the area. Black bear attacks were few and far between in the Ontario region. Since 1978, there had only been 4 known fatalities caused by black bears. The black bear involved in Jacqueline's attack was eventually hunted down by officials. They tracked down and killed a wounded black bear that was still in the area. It was a young, thin, and a hungry male who had been preying on the couple. It had taken the opportunity to secure an easy meal when Mark and Jacqueline visited the area. Black bears are especially dangerous when malnourished, sometimes causing them to attack people out of desperation for a meal. Jacqueline had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She hadn't startled the bear. She hadn't intruded on a female with her cubs. She had just been collecting wood for the fire, whilst the male bear stalked her. There was nothing she could have done once the bear started to maul her. All she could do was wait for her unfortunate final affliction.